All right, hello again, everybody. So this is going to cover that block and inline concept that I keep referring to. And the concept itself is fairly straightforward. But like with a lot of things with CSS, the interplay and sort of the dance that happens when these attributes interact with each other kind of gets complicated. So the display property for CSS controls how an element is displayed. So that does mean on or off. You can make an element not display at all by setting display : none. And you can show it by setting it to one of its other default values. Basically, anything that's not defined as none will show the element. So the difference between block and inline has to do with the flow of the HTML document. So what we're used to working with, actually, let me back up for a second. And let me just open up my inspector tool so I can highlight some things. The document is comprised of a bunch of rectangles. Are you going to show me an inspector? What do I want? More tools. I always want more tools. Developer tools. It is not showing them for me here. I am not, oh, there we go. All right. I think because I'm broadcasting or screen capturing, it's a little bit slower. So anyway, all these HTML elements are big rectangles in some capacity. They might not look like rectangles, but when we hover over them, we can see that they're rectangles in one way or another. The text itself creates a rectangle. Even for things like images, this is a rectangle and it has a transparent background. So why that matters is these rectangles can be displayed in basically two different ways. Block, which is what we're accustomed to, which is where they stack vertically. That tends to be what we've been working with for our HTML elements in these examples, and also inline. And inline is like text. Text by default is displayed inline. So when you're typing in a Word document, each word flows after each other horizontally until you reach the end of the page, or it can't fit on a line, and then it will go to the next line. So they're stacked horizontally instead of vertically. So it seems like a very straightforward difference, but the way that CSS treats these things is a little bit nuanced. So I think you'll become accustomed to it once I do an example here. So I have another pen. This is another pen that you're going to be able to fork and play around with. So I'm going to do my bare bones HTML document. HTML body. That's like the bare minimum that I need to get this ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make 4 divs, 4 boxes. And I'm going to call them box 1, box 2, box 3, and box 4. So you'll see. And the classes I'm going to call box 1, box 2, etc. they kind of lose their personality of when I say, hi, I'm box rate, when I do 4 of them, huh? I don't know. It's not like these have a bunch of personality to begin with. But I wanna keep this simple so you see the concepts. So if you notice here, these, every time I need a new div, there's a line break. And so these are stacked vertically. So my little diagram here, what does that look like? That looks like block, right? Because they're stacked vertically. So there's no CSS properties, even though I defined a class here in the HTML, I haven't actually written what goes into that class in the CSS. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to open it. Oops, not this. Go away. Change view, this 4th one down. Debug mode opens up in a new tab. And I can see my inspector. So I've defined actually no CSS in this document, but I can still check things out. Div block 1. And what I notice here is I didn't define this. You notice how it says user agent style sheet. What that means is it's taking the default value of the element itself, what the browser will display by default if nothing else is defined. Sometimes browsers have different defaults. That's what libraries like normalize.css kind of smooth out. But this isn't anything that I've defined. But you notice it says display block, and that's because by default, divs are displayed as block elements. They'll stack vertically. I didn't put any line breaks here. They're just stacking because by default, that's how they're displayed. Not all elements are displayed as block. In fact, most text CSS elements, as a rule of thumb, are displayed as inline because text is inline. So, okay, let's go back to my example here. And let's define the CSS. So the first thing that I'm going to do is define the background colors, just so that way they're easily identifiable. And then I'll make some additional changes. So I'll say red. Oops. Background color. Okay. You'll notice now it's really apparent how they're stacked. And you'll also notice how now they take up the full width of the page. They're stacked and their width takes up, well, almost. There's actually a margin. And if you notice, like it doesn't go right to the edge. Let me refresh. And why that's happening is, I'm going to select body right here, this element body, which all HTML documents have. Here's that user agent style sheet again. By default has a margin of 8 pixels all the way around. By default, all HTML documents, unless you specify otherwise, will have that margin of 8 pixels. And just let's specify otherwise, just so you see. Instead of 8 pixels, I'm going to say the margin is going to be 0 pixels. No margin. If you notice, oops, I keep doing that, sorry. That margin went away. So let me refresh here. And you see, user agent style sheet, that default margin 8 pixels is crossed out. Now it's replaced by my custom CSS. I could make it 50 pixels all around if I wanted to, see? I can make it 500 pixels, and that would make it disappear because it's, because my screen size is bigger than 1000. That's gonna push it all the way down. Okay, so let's get rid of that. So I can modify whatever the defaults are just by doing something like that. So, all right, now let's change some stuff. So by default, because they're block, these elements will fill up 100% of the width. And it does, aside from that 8 pixel margin on both the right and the left. But let's say the width of box 1, we want to be 100 pixels. It shrunk, lo and behold. Notice that box 2 is still beneath it though. It didn't move up. It's still stacked. So I'm gonna make the width of box 2 300 pixels. Notice they're still vertically stacked. That line break between them is still happening. They're still blocks. And then I'll say this one. This width is 50 pixels. Hi, I'm box 3. And if you notice here, this text, I made this box 50 pixels, and the text can't fit on one line now. So a line break was created, and the text flows to another line, just like a Word document. When you reach the end of the page, the border of the page, your word processor will insert the text on the next line. Same thing happened here, and the height of this box is now taller than the other boxes above it because the height is being defined by the text itself. So this text requires 2 lines, so this box 3 is going to be two lines high. These can fit on 1 line, so the height of these boxes are 1 line tall. And then box 4, I'm gonna give this width, I'm not gonna define it in pixels, I'm gonna just say 25%. And what that 25% is going to refer to is 25% of the width of the containing element, which in this case is body. So they are still stacked. Now about that height, let's say I like this height. You know, I know, or I don't like it, but I noticed that one of my boxes has 2 lines of text. So I want to make them all kind of tall to compensate for that. So I can define my height. Let's say I'm going to say I want all of these boxes to be 120 pixels tall. Actually, I'm going to make them 70 just so we have more real estate on the screen. So I'm going to just copy and paste this because it's easier. Oops. Actually, it's not easier because I have everything lined up. All right. Now they all have the same height, but they're still stacked like that. Okay, so we want to change these to be inline, or I'm deciding that we want to change them to be inline. So by default, I'm going to save this. Remember, by default, divs are displayed as blocks. So when I hover over them, you notice they still, the inspector's tool compensates for that missing 100% width with this like peach color. highlight over it. And what that's telling you is that the flow of the document, the flow of these elements is taking up 100% of the width, but we're defining the width to be a certain value, so it's only being displayed as a certain value. But the document flow still considers each one of these to be 100%. And that's why they each take up a separate line and they're stacked vertically. So notice, even though all these have different widths, when I hover over them, that highlight is the same width for all of them. So, okay, why does this matter? Well, div, display block, that's the default, remember? So now I don't have display block defined anywhere here. It's taking on that value because it's the default. So now I'm going to override the default and I'm going to say display inline. Once I do that, something interesting happens. That height shrank. It still has height here, but that height went away. I'll delete it so you can see. And as soon as I add display inline, the height goes away. All right, box 2, I'm going to say display inline. The height went away and it moved up a line. Very interesting. Box 3, display inline. Same thing. Display inline. All right. So what do you notice about this? Well, a couple things happened. They all lost their height. Well, more than a couple things happened. They all lost that height value. They all lost the width value as well. Remember how they were all different widths? How do you think the width here is being defined? Or what's governing the width? It is the length of the text. Notice these boxes are not any bigger than the text length. And they're all the same size because they have the same amount of text in them. But I could change that. Here's some more text. You'll see that box 3 gets bigger to accommodate for that text. So the width is being governed by the text, the content itself. And then height went away, and they're being displayed horizontally, like that inline illustration, I guess I would call this. That inline one element after the other, like text, like letters in a word processing document. All right, so very interesting. Why is this important? Well, for a lot of typography, which you'll soon find out, if you want to make a change in the middle of a line, you need to make sure that the change that you're making is being displayed as inline. Otherwise, the text will move down a line, just like we saw by default. The divs are displayed as boxes. They're stacked vertically. So that won't happen if the attribute that you're changing displays as inline by default, but that's not always the case. So let me just show you that so you know what I'm referring to, and can take advantage of the screen, so I'm not just talking in its abstractions. So let's say, I want to say this is normal text. And I'll say amongst the normal text, there lives some bold text hidden in the shadows, except it's not really hidden in the shadows. It's right there. So how interesting. So normal text, let's change that up. So normal text. First, let's put a margin top on that so it's not squished up against those other boxes. Say 30 pixels. Font size 22 pixels. Sure. And font weight. Now, font weight can be defined numerically or semantically. We're going to talk more about font weight when I explain your project to you, which will be the next video. So for now, I'm just going to use normal and bold. But there's other ways to define font weights because many fonts have numerous weights, not just normal and bold. Microsoft Word does a lot of fonts a disservice because you just have like that B bold button and that's your only option is bold or not bold. Anyway, so normal text, cool. And then I said that some bold text lives among, even though it's hidden in the shadows. It's not really hidden in the shadows, that's not true. So I'm going to put another div inside of here, bold text. What I did here was I embedded a div inside this div. Remember, Russian dolls. So while you're coding, if it helps you to put things on a new line, these new lines do not correspond to line breaks in HTML. They're just useful to help you sort through it. You'll notice when I, well, let me define my bold text class first, so it looks differently. I will say font weight bold. Notice it changed to bold. I'm also going to make the font size bigger, 33 pixels. Yeah. You notice that when I embedded the div inside this div, the bold text dropped down a line. It's still stacked. So as soon as I insert the new div here, the document flow is saying, okay, new line, just like these boxes when they were vertically stacked, created a new line. So what do you think that we have to do here? Same thing that we did with those boxes. So I'm going to say, well, first, to display inline. Now what happened when I did that? It jumped up here because that line break that you were seeing, and it's ignoring this margin top, was happening because just from creating a new div. So I actually don't want to change that one. I want to keep it the way it is. So let's try changing this one. Display inline. Ah, that's the part that we want to jump up. Great. Awesome. Okay, cool. So now that bold text is inline, when we switch and we add a new class in the middle of some text because we want to stylize the text that we have, the copy that we have, it's not going to create a new line. These elements are flowing in line. Now, let's say I want to make this bold text as well. In the bold text in the shadows div. you'll notice that the same thing happened, that these did not drop down, they didn't start stacking, and that's because I'm applying the same property, and this property has display inline in it. So that's great. We like that. That's very useful. So if you notice things not lining up correctly and line breaks being inserted where you don't want them to be, what might be happening there is something's being displayed as block or inline that you don't want it to be displayed as. So let's say you really want this element to be displayed as inline for this normal text rather, for other reasons. We saw here that when I make normal text display as inline, it jumps up to the top. But let's say I really want a line break here. All right, so we can use our break tag here, and that will give us a line break. But it's not quite that 30 pixels, is it? Let's do another one. Now you'll notice when I have inline, it ignored that margin top 30. Just like when I put display inline here, it started ignoring the height and the width that I had defined. So what CSS has, it's sort of like a hybrid property, and it gets a little bit confusing because they call this hybrid property inline block, inline hyphen block. And what that is, it's like a hybrid between inline display and block display. So block, remember, when we have block applied, I just changed box 1 to be back to block, we have that information about the dimensions. It displays information about the dimensions. Similarly, if I want to put a margin bottom here, just so you could say 50 pixels, it pushes those others down. Block elements affect the flow of the document in this way. Inline doesn't at all. Inline ignores values of dimensionality. So let's put inline. Let's say I want to use that hybrid value that I just described. Now we get kind of like the best of both worlds, right? We get that dimensionality. It's going to recognize the width and the height, but it's also going to stay inline and not create a new line. It's not going to be vertically stacked. So you might say, why would we ever use inline when we have inline block? Well, you will. And these are the things that will manifest itself in your typography project. It's not that obvious. And I kind of want you guys to figure out the quirks and the nuances of how these things interplay through your own kind of hacking around. I guess this is hacking. You guys can be hackers rather than me show you all of it because I feel like you'll start to become accustomed to when you would be using inline block or block through doing it. So box 3, inline block. Now what happened when I did that? Whoops. Because I typed it wrong. There we go. Isn't that interesting? Now you'll notice something happened here. Something different. Now the heights are kind of different. Why do you think that that might be happening? Let's change that width and see if that makes a difference. Oh, when I change this width, that margin at the top disappeared. And then when I have this width of 50, it kind of pushes these boxes down. That's quite weird, right? You wouldn't expect that. But like I told you at the start of class, this stuff is sort of an exercise in relinquishing expectations that things are going to work the way that you anticipate or expect. So inline block, inline has quirks associated with it. This one here, I'm going to leave open and maybe you can figure it out. Maybe you can figure out why when box 3 has 2 lines, or is the width is small enough that the text is forced on 2 lines, it pushes the other 2 boxes down. I'm going to leave that open, and you can play around with this code pen. And I have a couple others actually that make use of typography. And see if you can figure out why that behavior is happening and try to make sense of it. So that is inline and block. Our next video is going to talk about your typography project. And that's it for now. All right, thanks for listening.